What's up, Michigan, and welcome back inside the State Champs Sports Network studio. I'm the Director of Operations for Yellow Flag Productions and State Champs, Lorne Plant, and I want to welcome you to another conversation with the Executive Director of the Michigan High School Sports Association, Mark Ewell. Let's officially welcome you to our house. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Lorne.
All right, well, thank you so much for being here, and let me just get the gushy stuff out of the way right off the bat. So the partnership that our two organizations have shared has not only been a great one since day one, the day that State Champs took to the airwaves back in 2002. More importantly, how the relationship has grown really over the last 7 years or so. It's just been terrific getting an opportunity for our team to work with your team, so thank you.
You know, with media, kind of old school media, it looks a lot different than it did 20 years ago, and I think those of us that really are passionate about the high school space realized sometimes you need to tell your own story, and the partnership with State Champs and the MHSAA is one of the most valuable relationships and partnerships that we have. So that govern is felt in both directions.
Yes, the feeling is mutual. Yes, all right, so it looks like there's always something happening in the world of Michigan high school sports. The 2023-2024 sports year is winding down. What would you say have been the highlights of this past scholastic sports year in the eyes of the MHSAA?
You know, this has really been the most normal year we've had since COVID, and maybe this will be our last time together to where the COVID word even comes up. But, you know, even the subsequent year or two coming out of COVID, it still kind of lurked out there. There were still kind of some workarounds and some contingency plans. This has felt like the most normal school year that we've had since. Attendance, fall, winter, and even spring from the early reports will probably be close to an all-time attendance record again this year, which really just shows that, again, post-pandemic, I think people realized how valuable high school sports were when the threat of it maybe being on pause or even being taken away, I think was really, really important. So, no, it's been great. You know, a few unique things this year. We played some championship football games on Sunday at Ford Field this year.
That's right.
That was very, very unique.
Yeah.
You know, a really good winter with good weather, great attendance this winter. You know, in some cases, we had better weather in February and March than we did in early April and May.
I know.
But we're finishing strong, and it's really just been a normal year where we've been able to completely focus on the accomplishments of kids, coaches, teams, and communities, and that's the way that we want it.
Yeah, and speaking of the final weekend, I mean, I think the relationship at Michigan State has been phenomenal. It's just, you know, such a great environment to have the soccer going and the softball going and the baseball going all right there. You can really get an immersive experience.
And we're beyond lucky. When Michigan State built really all three of those new facilities at Old College Field, you've now got baseball and softball that are almost identical type facilities, side by side, shiny, new. And the ironic thing is the best weather of the year, because Michigan State, their baseball and softball teams are playing in March and April where the weather is awful. So that investment that Michigan State made, I feel a little bit guilty that we almost reap the most benefit of anybody. And then, of course, now the soccer field, and actually all three fields now have lights. So that question comes about, well, what if you'd ever run into bad weather or a long rain delay? It's middle of the state. It's an hour-and-a-half drive for 90% of the people in our state. Selfishly, staff, we all get to sleep in our own beds. It's 10 minutes from the front door for most of us. And really, Michigan State is the perfect place to end the school year on campus. Best weather of the year. And, I can't wait to see that checkered flag get waved with the last either second on the clock or the last out made.
All right, let's move on. The Representative Council has approved 2 new sports to officially begin next school year. So not this year that's coming up, but in 25-26, girls field hockey in the fall and boys volleyball in the spring. Can you just talk about, because I'm sure a lot of people wonder, like, what that journey is like for a club sport to eventually make its way into becoming a sanctioned sport, because it doesn't happen overnight.
So I'm in my 21st year with the association, and my first year on staff was the last time that we added sports. So both boys and girls lacrosse were added sports back in 2004, and we've really gone almost 2 decades without adding any new opportunities. Boys volleyball, the growth that they've experienced has really driven a lot of this conversation. it's a guideline, but our guidelines are that once 64 schools sponsor a sport on a club basis, that kind of gets you on the dance floor. It's not absolute, because when we did add both lacrosses, 20 years ago, boys lacrosse was just over that 64 number. Girls lacrosse was not, but of course with Title IX, you've got to be mindful if you're going to add a new opportunity for boys, you need to also add that new opportunity for girls. So the numbers with volleyball were there. It's very, very strong in West Michigan. Right now, nearing 100 schools that have it. So that really put them front and center. The numbers were there. And the great thing with volleyball, Lorne, is we already have empty gyms in the spring with volleyball equipment, with volleyball coaches, and we already register volleyball officials. So in terms of the infrastructure of how do you add a sport, volleyball was about as easy as it came. The companion sport with that was girls field hockey. If volleyball for boys is really strong in West Michigan, girls field hockey is really, really strong here on the east part of the state, the metro area. And so that's the two additions with boys volleyball, which will be in the spring, girls field hockey, which will be a fall sport. Those will go in a year from now. And we can tell your viewers and listeners, I don't think this is the last step in the process. With girls flag football being an Olympic sport, with the attention it got with the draft being here in Detroit last month, which was awesome. And the NFL has put some real money behind their girls flag football initiative. So I see the conversation with girls flag football coming back to our board sooner rather than later. And then there's also a couple other sports, boys and girls water polo, indoor track and field, as well as some others that I think will also be looked at. The challenge we have is you want to try and meet the needs of as many kids as possible. But the ironic thing is, over the last 20 years, the average size of high schools in Michigan continues to shrink. We've actually have more high schools today, 753 that are members of our association, than we did 20 years ago. But the average size, the number of students in each of those schools is less. Average size high school in Michigan currently is 582 kids. So it's under 600 now. So the challenge of, do you make more offerings? Is the student population keeps shrinking gradually? So that's the needle that we're trying to thread.
Yeah, and I think with lacrosse, you saw that participation level grow up. The women's lacrosse was a growing sport, now is flourishing.
You bet.
And I think if you look at a sport, the interesting thing is I had a daughter go through the high school system, through the PSEP system over in Canton, and I know that some kids were looking for a sport that, they weren't necessarily had to be proficient in, something that they knew really well, because there's a lot of competition, especially at some of the bigger public schools. So a sport like field hockey maybe can come in, and it can give an opportunity for a student to kind of learn on the fly and get an opportunity to feel like, they're one of the team as well.
Absolutely. And the other thing it may do is also give kids some new options or choices in their off season. Boys volleyball, I think we're going to have an awful lot of basketball players that may look at volleyball in the spring and say, well, do I want to travel all over the universe with my AAU team? Or what? Do I want to keep working on my game, but do it a little more locally? And in the spring, I want to play volleyball with my friends and be part of something new and historic. So we're hoping we may get some of that as well.
I think you will. We have men's volleyball here at Lawrence Tech, and it is really taking off and is attracting more student athletes. Talked about the Olympics. Still one of the most popular Olympic sports is watching the men's volleyball go at it. And it's tremendously, it's got a great physicality to it. And I think it's going to be very attractive. Growing up in California, as I did, it was a mainstay in the California school system. Men's volleyball, boys volleyball was just a part of the deal, and this was way back in the day. So I won't tell you how long, but yes. So very exciting, and I'm sure that those sports are going to take off. Another notable change is that the winter season overall, once these take effect, it's going to be shortened a little bit. It's going to look different in 2 years than it traditionally has looked like, and that means championship weekends too. And I think for the good.
If you followed schools in Michigan over the years, spring breaks in our state have consistently gotten earlier and earlier. And the reason for that are the state testing windows. So back when, probably Lorne, you and I were in school, spring break was always the first week of April. And a lot of times it probably coincided with Easter. Well, the state testing window in Michigan is the second full week of April. And what schools have learned over the years is, you know what, kids running all over the country on the beach with the family and other places the first week, and then we get them back in the building on Monday for one day, and now Tuesday is the big day that we start the state testing cycle. That wasn't good for kids, and it wasn't good for education. Right. So now those spring breaks have moved to the last week of March in an awful lot of places in our state.
That's right.
Which now currently overlaps with our current basketball schedule. We've got right now currently about half of the teams that get to Breslin for that last weekend of basketball, whether it be boys or girls, and about half of them started spring break the day before. So you're seeing less community support, you're seeing less student support. True. And what we did with our team is we said, hey, what does the winter need to look like? So the first big change is we're going to align our boys basketball finals weekend the same weekend as the Big Ten basketball tournament. What that does is, number one, it guarantees us that the Breslin will be empty and open to us every year for our boys tournament, because if there was a building conflict that came up, our options for other sites to move boys are much more limited than they would be if it was for girls. So the boys season will be first permanently moving forward, with their finals being essentially that first weekend of March, first or second Saturday in March, depending how the calendar falls. And then our girls will be the following weekend, also at Breslin. Now, there is some talk about the NCAA women's tournament with the great success they've had this year, that would they ever now move the women's tournament sites also to neutral sites? Because right now the one kind of roll of the dice is with our girls. If Michigan State would be a top 4 seed in the region, so top 16 in the country, we potentially could have to move our girls' finals because Michigan State would be hosting. That hasn't happened in a number of years. The Spartans are, though, new coaching staff continuing to get better and better. Right. So we've got a really good plan in place that we're now going to have our winter tournaments, all of them, culminating with girls basketball, which we now should be done by about the 20th of March each year. And the other thing that it does is I think our spring sport coaches often feel like they get the short end. You know, there tends to be a little more, not from us, but you know, the fall and winter just seem to have a little bit different spotlight on them, a little bit different coverage, a little bit different mindset. And now with winter ending earlier, our spring coaches are going to have access to their kids earlier than they ever have. And that, I think, is something that's really going to be good. But and it also getting our boys basketball finals, if we're going to compete with something for media attention, spectators, I'd much rather compete against the conference tournament weekend than the first or second round weekend of the NCAA tournament, because that's a behemoth that is really unlike anything else. A few of our other winter sports aren't moving. So, for example, individual wrestling at Ford Field, that's got to stay on the first weekend in March, because the last weekend in February is Monster Jam at Ford Field.
Tradition, unlike no other.
The dirt and the noise and all that. So some of our shifting with our calendar was a little bit dependent on our venues, but long story short, what currently is a 5-weekend finals calendar for winter, it's going to shrink to 4. It's going to shorten at the back end by a week, and we just think that this is really going to be a good thing moving forward.
Yeah. You mentioned wrestling. I think one of the unmitigated successes has been the launch of girls wrestling and the participation levels we've seen in that. One of the things I noticed was kind of just a quick line, but you guys have figured out a way to add a team championship to wrestling that will also start. What's that about?
So our wrestling folks know that back in the day, which my kids use that term all the time, but you know, you go back many years, the way that we determined our state team wrestling champion was based on the points you accumulated at the individual final meet. Well, back in the 80s, Michigan was one of the first states to come up with a team dual tournament. So now it's just one school against another school. It's your 14 wrestler lineup against the other school's 14 wrestler lineup, and we now award a team championship the last weekend of February, and then our individual finals are that following weekend. What we're now going to do with the girls is we're going to kind of use that old school formula of back many, many years ago, that point system. So how many qualifiers you have, and then how many matches each of your qualifiers win at Ford Field will add up those points. And at the end of the meet, will now be able to award a girls team champion and a girls team runner-up. Our goal and our crystal ball down the road, I would love, Lorne, in 10 years from now, to say that the numbers in girls have grown as well, and we can also have the team dual tournament, 14 versus 14, and then the individual finals the week following. We're just not there yet.
Right.
And because you're not there, it'd be silly for us to cross our arms and say, well, we're not going to award a team championship until we're there. So I think it's really a good common sense approach. Our girls wrestling community is incredibly excited that just like the boys, they're going to have their team champ and runner-up recognized.
Yeah, it'll be really fun to see, kind of like you get in a swimming scenario.
Exactly.
Where you see as the matches are going on, and they always start at odd divisions depending on how the draw is, how close they are, and that would be, even if that you may not have let's say you've got some outstanding wrestler who is clearly heads and tails maybe above yours, but there's a points thing as we get towards the end that keeps you in it.
It could be someone who qualifies for the finals,
right?
Maybe isn't the strongest wrestler on your team, but you know what? If she can win a match or two,
right,
and instead of going 0-2, can maybe go 1-2 or 2-2, that could be the difference of your team being similar to track and field finals. That your runner who finishes 5th instead of 7th or 8th, those team points are very valuable at the end of the meet.
Yeah, and in those swim finals, if you're 4th or 5th, you get 3 that are in the top 5 there. That gives you those points too. So awesome. Well, of course, we're already looking ahead to the fall because that's just what we do. In fact, the first practice for teams will be in about 9 weeks. So enjoy the time you have now. Another change in a couple of years as it relates to football is capping the enrollment for 8-player to 250 students at that school. Why was this move necessary?
So adding 8-player football has been a great thing in our state overall. So the viewers and listeners know that for a lot of years, we've had 8 divisions of the 11-player. We added a 9th division for 8-player, and then a few years later, we went from 1 division to 2 division of 8-player. As things have really evolved over the last decade, the one group of schools that are really feeling the most pain are our smallest schools still playing 11-player football.
Right.
Because a lot of those small schools in those communities, which, by the way, 8-player has kept football alive in many of our communities in our state.
Agreed.
But what was happening is some of the smallest schools were going the 8-player route. Well, then the rest of the league said, well, just based on scheduling, I guess we have to play 8-player as well. So it's really isolated some of our smallest schools, still trying to keep 11-player going. And every year that cutoff, that enrollment cutoff for Division 8 has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. So we really needed to do something intentional to help our smallest schools still playing 11-player football. And so now what we'll do is next spring, when we get everybody's enrollment based on their February count, we'll now draw that line for Division 8 at 250. So any school that is 250 or smaller, you'll automatically be in Division 8. If that means that, because right now currently we've got 8 equal divisions of about 64 schools. Mm-hmm. And if that means that only 40 schools are below 250, that'll be your group for D8, and then the other 7 divisions will divide those out equally. What we hope is by protecting D8 with 250 and below, it might get some schools who are somewhere in the 200s who have made the move to 8-player who may now say, well, wait a minute. This now gives us a real chance to compete again. As an 11-player school, our program is growing, our numbers are up. Because also, don't forget, when 8-player football came along, that was the time where everybody was writing the obituary for football.
Yeah.
You go back a decade or so ago talking about concussions and, whoever the president was at the time, would you let your son play football?
Right.
And, that was the thought. So I came down with a couple of coworkers and my brother, and we were walking around the Thursday night of the NFL draft. And I said it to him. I said, how interesting is we walk around and see downtown Detroit never looking better with, close to 700,000 of our very best friends and looking at the excitement of that Thursday night and saying, remember back about a decade when everybody said, you know what, you just give it a few years, football's going away. I would argue that there's no safer time to play football than today with the equipment advances, all of the information and education that is out there about concussion and head injury, the way that the playing rules have changed, the different ways that we now officiate the game, the way that we're coaching the game. There is not a more safe time to play football than today, and I think that's part of the success story. And as numbers grow, I think this really could help some of our 8-player schools jump back into 11 players. So that's not yet for this fall. That'll go into effect the year after, but we think that'll be a really good thing for our small schools that still want to play the 11-player game and try and get to that D8 final on that first morning at Ford Field.
There is more news that you can discover regarding some regulations, changes, information regarding sports medicine and officials. Find the press release selection at MHSAA.com. I do want to say that the MHSAA website has really been transformed over the past couple of years. It's very user-friendly. You've got news on coaches, ADs, of course, the sports that are going on at the moment. The record book stuff is always fun and really easy to find now. Some of our videos there, which is really great. I would further guess that other people are happy with it too.
They are. The website itself is a new look. And, where we started the conversation about with traditional media looking a lot different than it used to, we've got to really tell our own story.
Yeah.
And now when you go to our website, it used to be very administrative, rules, regulations, and it's now much more fan-friendly where it really tells the stories, not just what our team led by our communications director, Jeff Kimmerly, but also with our partners with video and John Ross in our building, and obviously the content that State Champs provides. It's much more fan-centric, and it really tells the story of school sports. And the best part is not just with the new website, is at that same time there was a huge investment into the mobile app. So grab your phone, go to MHSAA.com, much more user-friendly where you can get to those stories, get to that video, get to all of the resources there, much better than you could just a handful of years ago, and we're really excited about that.
I agree, and I'm glad you brought that up because for those of us who are, especially state tournament time and you are getting into the semifinals and finals, it's much easier to get to the brackets and see where everybody's going to be, where the game's going to be.
And now with your phone, you can buy tickets for the game that you're going to.
Yeah.
If you're caught on work or you're a relative who lives out of state, also on your phone or your computer, you can jump on MHSAA.tv and watch the games that you want to see. So again, I mentioned COVID earlier that I would never want to relive that, but there are some things that COVID forced us to do that frankly I think have made us a better organization for it. And certainly streaming is one of those because that toothpaste is not going back into the tube. And really now streaming has really been something that I think most people now have come to expect, especially if your kids are on what we call either a gym sport or a stadium sport, that if you play in the gym or you play in your school stadium, chances are very good there's a stream of those contests going on.
All right, we're having a great conversation with Mark Ewell. Just a couple more here. You guys do so much more than just run the state tournaments. I know that's what a lot of people just think that's what you serve your purpose for. But again, you mentioned the fan stuff now especially, and that's probably the majority of what people interact with. But a couple things I always like to bring up is because they're very impactful to students. Number one, the Scholar Athletes Awards program, and when you talk about that. And number two, the Student Advisory Council.
So Farm Bureau has been one of our very best partners now going on 30 years, and they completely underwrite all of the scholarships. The scholarships are now $2,000, which again, that's depending on where you go, is a nice little bite of your cost and fees.
Yeah.
And we recognize our Scholar Athlete Award winners each year. Kids have to apply. An essay is part of that application. And we bring in upstairs in our building, it looks like a library. All of the quiet reading is we bring in 2 different judging panels and they look at those. And then we always announce the Scholar Athlete Award winners. Farm Bureau's able to work with us to make those presentations at the Breslin Center during boys basketball each year. And that's been a really neat program. And then the way we're also able to keep our finger on the pulse of what our kids are thinking is our Student Advisory Committee. It's 16 members, 8 juniors, 8 seniors. So every year our graduating 8 seniors move on, and then we bring a new set of 8 incoming juniors. So we're able to keep some consistency with that group to where you're not changing 16 brand new people out each year. And it's really our best and brightest. We have a great cross-section of kids from all kinds of schools, urban, suburban, rural, public, non-public. they're really the voice for the student athlete in the state of Michigan, and that's something that's now over a decade old. And I feel like our selection process and the kids we're getting into the room just gets better and better all the time.
Yeah, and once we get into the fall, then that soon-to-be junior group the next year can start applying for that.
You got it.
For that award.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, lastly, please talk about officiating, because it's something we always feel we have to mention, and the need for it. The officials are near and dear to your heart, as you are one yourself. We can't do it without them people, and every year there are some who will be looking to retire to do whatever it is that they need to do, and whatever the factors are that no longer allow them to be able to participate. The opportunity for new officials to get trained, hit the ground running. It's not a super long process, and the pay is pretty good too.
And the pay has actually gotten a lot better here in the last 2 years. So, I was our officiating director for my first 15 years on staff before I changed offices 6 years ago. And we had record numbers of officials back in the mid-2000s. And you say, well, okay, what was the secret sauce? What were you doing for recruiting? And the reality is as Bill Clinton once said, it's the economy, stupid. It was the economy, because back in the mid-2000s were some of the darkest economic times that our state has ever had. And believe it or not, our number of officials is directly related to the economy. Tough economic times, our numbers go up. Folks are looking for ways to make a little bit extra money, to maybe bridge some gaps that they have. And conversely, when the economy is good, we tend to struggle. All of this got blown up with COVID. What COVID did is we knew that we would have a little bit of a shortage bubble coming. COVID just simply fast forwarded that on steroids, and we really had some really stark shortages coming out of COVID. The thing that we've done, and what I'm happy to announce, is that we had a 5% increase in the number of officials this current year over the year before. Okay. And the other thing is we've made a real investment in officiating, that now when you join as an MHSAA official, you're also a member of the National Association of Sports Officials. So you get a monthly edition, yes, it does exist, of Referee Magazine, which has all kinds of articles, features, rule study, tips. It's a monthly ongoing professional development opportunity.
Nice.
And the other thing it does is all of the insurance coverages that an official needs. Being an NASO member along with MHSAA, you're covered no matter where you work. So working that high school game or middle school game, you're covered. And then if you want to work that travel game, that youth game, that church league game, you're also now covered. And then the other thing that has really changed is the money. Schools had realized that game fees had fallen behind, and in most places of our state, if you worked a varsity football or basketball game this current year, you were probably making somewhere between $70 to $80 a game. Next school year, that same varsity game is going to be up over $100, anywhere from $105 to $120 a game. So we're actually seeing some officials that have kind of moved on from the high school game, and we're focusing more on college. What we're now seeing is they're coming back and working high school games on their nights off, because I'll stay close to home and work a game for $115, where that's just, a $50 increase from where we were the year before. That's become a little bit of a game changer as well. So never a better time to get involved in officiating. MHSAA.com, click on the officials button, and we can get you set up from there.
Okay, fantastic. Well, as we wrap this conversation, is there anything else you'd like to let the people know about?
Just that MHSAA.com is literally your one-stop shop. It's tickets, it's video, it's live streams, it's scores, it's schedules. So if you really want to be in the loop on what's new, what's happening, MHSAA.com is really the place to be. And again, we're kind of back in the normalcy after the pandemic. One of my lasting lessons coming out of COVID, with all of the angst and opinions and emotions when things were paused and then started and then had to pause again based on our government regulations at the time. My biggest takeaway, Lorne, is just how important school sports are. A lot of times we get a little bit, I don't want to say brushed off, but the club scene is really where it's at, and the travel scene, that's really where the elite is at. And colleges, they really don't care about what kids do in high school. And the emotion and the outcry that we heard from communities during COVID really solidified the fact that school sports have probably never been more important and valuable to kids than they are today. And it was a hard lesson to learn. It was a miserable lesson to learn as we kind of navigated through 2020, 2021, and even into 2022. But it says the work that we do, and when I say we, that state champs and the MHSAA, the work we do is important. The work that we do and the programs we offer is important in kids' lives, in their families' lives, in their community, in their school, and it really makes you feel good. It's a great responsibility, certainly, that you need to make sure that you answer the bell and come through on those programs. But what we do is important. What we do is valued, and that really keeps myself and our staff going every day.
Hear, hear. Do you hear that, people? And if you want to sponsor any of our programs, you can do that. You can just enjoy this love of high school sports, which we do. Mark, it is always a pleasure getting a chance to have a chat with you, and we thank you so much for coming to our house for this. He is the executive director of the MHSAA. Good luck as the spring season winds down, and then we'll all gear up and get excited for the fall.
Thanks, Lorne. Always great to be with you.
All right. Thank you.